Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to unpack another fascinating story from the text? Today, we're diving deep into Genesis chapter 41. And to make things even more interesting, we're looking at it through the lens of My Christian Space, which offers a really unique interpretation.
Sounds intriguing. I'm ready when you are.
So, chapter 41, it throws us right into the action. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind to the end of chapter 40. You know where we left off. Joseph is stuck in prison, totally forgotten. Remember that whole thing with the cupbearer and the dream?
Right. He interprets the cupbearer's dream, which foreshadowed the cupbearer getting his old gig back.
Exactly. And Joseph, being hopeful, he even asks the cupbearer, hey, once you're back in good with Pharaoh, maybe put in a good word for me.
It almost feels like a throwaway line, like, oh yeah, if you get a chance. But it turns out that request, it actually sets the stage for what's about to unfold.
Totally. But here's the thing. Years go by. Years. And we hear that phrase from the end of 2 years of days, which always strikes me as such a powerful way to describe it. It's not just 2 years gone, but every single day.
You're right. It emphasizes the grind, the seeming endlessness of Joseph's situation. And this detail, it's highlighted by My Christian Space as a way of emphasizing the weight of those years. It really underscores the impossibility of Joseph's situation from a human perspective.
And that's what makes what happens next so incredible. Talk about a plot twist. Pharaoh starts having these super intense, really disturbing dreams. I mean, we're talking about healthy cows being eaten by sickly ones, plump ears of grain swallowed up by withered ones. Who dreams this stuff?
And it's not just the imagery itself, but the fact that no one in Pharaoh's court, not his advisors, not his magicians, nobody can figure out what these dreams mean. My Christian Space really emphasizes this point.
Like his go-to guys are totally stumped.
Exactly, and it speaks volumes about the limitations of worldly wisdom, especially when it comes to understanding something as profound as a message from God.
Okay, so Pharaoh's obviously freaked out, right? He knows deep down these dreams are more than just random nighttime weirdness. They mean something important. But he's got no clue what.
And that's where our forgotten hero, Joseph, finally gets his time in the spotlight again. But we'll get into that in part 2.
Stay tuned. So we left off with Pharaoh in a total panic, right? He's had these crazy, vivid dreams. Nobody can figure them out. And that's when, boom, the cupbearer finally remembers Joseph.
Talk about divine timing, right? Like, it almost seems orchestrated, like all the pieces falling into place.
Like the ultimate, oh yeah, I forgot to mention moment.
Totally. And My Christian Space really emphasizes how the sudden remembering wasn't just a coincidence, it was God's plan all along.
So, picture this. Joseph gets yanked out of prison, probably hasn't had time for a shower or anything, and next thing you know, he's standing in front of Pharaoh himself. Talk about nerve-wracking.
Right. And not only that, but he's being asked to interpret this dream that has everyone completely baffled.
And, you'd think after years of being wrongly imprisoned, Joseph might have a little bit of an attitude, but nope. Not a trace of bitterness. Instead, what does he say to Pharaoh when asked to interpret this crazy dream?
He immediately deflects any kind of praise or attention to himself. He tells Pharaoh flat out, it isn't in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer that will set his mind at peace. I mean, talk about humility.
Right. He's basically saying, don't look at me. I'm just the messenger here.
Yeah.
And that's such a key point that My Christian Space highlights. Joseph's humility, his willingness to put God first, it shines through in this moment, and it's ultimately what makes him such an effective leader later on.
Totally. Because true leadership isn't about ego or taking credit. It's about being a vessel, a conduit for something bigger than yourself. And that's exactly what Joseph does here. He steps back and lets God work through him.
Okay, so Joseph listens to Pharaoh describe these super weird, disturbing dreams, those fat cows getting eaten by the skinny cows, the good grain being gobbled up. And then he just lays it all out there, doesn't he?
He doesn't sugarcoat it. He tells Pharaoh that those 7 healthy cows and ears of grain, they represent 7 years of crazy abundance, like off-the-charts harvests. But then, get this, those scrawny cows, the withered ears, they represent 7 years of devastating famine that are going to hit right after. 7 years of feast followed by 7 years of famine.
I mean, can you imagine being Pharaoh hearing this? You'd be freaking out. This wasn't just some random fortune cookie prediction. This was a major warning.
And the source points out that the fact that the dream was doubled adds a whole other layer to it.
Double the dreams, double the trouble.
Right. But it's more than just that. The number 2, biblically speaking, it often symbolizes a witness or a confirmation. It's like God was saying, this is important. Pay attention.
It's like an exclamation point.
Yeah.
And Joseph, he doesn't just drop this bomb on Pharaoh and peace out. He steps up with a plan, a super detailed, well-thought-out plan to make sure Egypt can survive the coming famine.
Which is where we really see those leadership skills in action. He doesn't just see a problem. He sees an opportunity to lead, to make a difference. He talks about strategic planning, resource management, the whole 9 yards.
Joseph, the ancient world's supply chain guru. And here's the thing, Pharaoh, who's used to calling all the shots, he listens. He actually listens to Joseph and recognizes the wisdom in his words. That's huge.
And that, to me, that's the most incredible part of this whole story. Here's Pharaoh, this powerful ruler, and he could have easily let his ego get in the way, but he doesn't.
And Pharaoh really puts his trust in Joseph, doesn't he? I mean, he doesn't just say, okay, good idea, go for it.
Oh, not at all. This is where it gets even more interesting. Pharaoh basically says, you're in charge. You're running the show now.
Talk about a promotion, right?
Yeah,
From
yeah.
prisoner to, prime minister?
Basically. He becomes the second most powerful person in Egypt, entrusted with the well-being of the entire nation. And this is where my Christian space really draws our attention to Pharaoh's actions.
Because it would have been so easy for Pharaoh to take all the credit,
Right.
to claim he came up with the plan himself.
Exactly. But instead, he acknowledges Joseph's wisdom and puts him in a position of authority. And he doesn't stop there. He even gives Joseph a new name, Safnat Panik.
Which, if I remember correctly, it means.
It means something along the lines of hidden solving or revealer of secrets. It suggests that Pharaoh recognized something special in Joseph.
Like he had this sixth sense, you know.
Precisely. It's as if Pharaoh realized that Joseph possessed this unique connection to the divine, this ability to understand things on a deeper level. And this point about Pharaoh recognizing something special in Joseph, that's a key takeaway that my Christian space really wants us to remember.
And you know what else I find really interesting? The fact that Joseph ends up marrying Potiphar's daughter. Talk about a plot twist.
I know, right? Especially when you consider Potiphar was the one whose wife falsely accused Joseph, which landed him in prison in the first place.
It feels like a form of, I don't know, vindication. Like God working everything out in the end.
Absolutely. It really drives home the idea that even in the darkest of times, God is still in control. He can take even the worst situations and turn them around for good. And that's a really powerful message for us today, don't you think?
Totally. Okay, so Joseph gets to work. He implements his plan. And the 7 years of abundance, they begin. And the text doesn't hold back on describing just how abundant these years were.
It literally says they stopped keeping track of the grain because there was so much of it. It was like abundance on a scale they couldn't even comprehend.
Overflowing silos. Grain as far as the eye could see.
It's almost like a taste of paradise, you know? A glimpse of what life could be like under God's blessing. But then, of course, the other shoe drops.
7 years of famine.
And this wasn't just some localized drought. The text emphasizes that the famine was severe throughout the entire world.
Global crisis mode. People were struggling everywhere, right?
Exactly. And they all ended up looking to Egypt for help, for sustenance, which is where my Christian space draws this really interesting parallel. Just like Egypt, with all that grain Joseph had stored up, was the only source of physical food during the famine.
They're suggesting that there's only one source of true spiritual nourishment as well.
Precisely. And that source, of course, is God.
Wow. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis chapter 41, what are some of the key takeaways? I mean, this chapter, it's packed with them.
Oh, absolutely. We've got trusting in God's plan, even when it doesn't make sense to us. We've got recognizing and valuing wisdom, even when it comes from unexpected sources. And we've got that powerful reminder that even in the middle of global crisis, even when things seem hopeless, God is still there, and he's still in control.
It's a message that feels incredibly timely, even thousands of years later, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and I think that's the beauty of these stories. They might be ancient, but the lessons, they're timeless.
So, deep divers, as we sign off, here's something to think about. If we see Joseph's journey as a metaphor for our own lives, those metaphorical famines we all inevitably face, what can we do to prepare? How can we cultivate that same spirit of trust, that same willingness to listen to wisdom, even when it comes from unexpected places? Until next time, keep diving deep, and we'll see you back here for another exploration of the text.